Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay C. Gibson. 7-year-old Rhonda, standing on a sidewalk. A massive moving truck is being loaded with everything her family owns. Her parents and 3 older siblings are rushing around, busy with boxes and furniture, but something feels terribly wrong. No one touches her. No one speaks to her. A cold wave washes over her small body. She's surrounded by her family, yet she feels completely invisible. The thought crosses her mind, I'm with them, but I'm not really with them. It's an exhausting loneliness, and somehow she already knows this huge, confusing move is something she'll have to navigate entirely on her own. This feeling of quiet, invisible isolation, it follows countless people through their entire lives. They might build successful careers, create families, cultivate friendships, yet deep inside there's this hollow space, a sense of being fundamentally unseen. Some call it emptiness. Others just know it as a strange, private loneliness they can't quite name. Here's something that might surprise you. That feeling has a source, and none of it is your fault. Today we're diving into a remarkable book by clinical psychologist Dr. Lindsay C. Gibson called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. This isn't just another self-help book. It's more like a key that unlocks a mystery many of us didn't even realize we were trying to solve. With decades of experience as a therapist, Dr. Gibson illuminates something as real as any physical wound, yet it leaves no visible scars: emotional neglect. By the time we finish, you'll understand the profound impact of growing up with parents who, despite possibly meaning well, simply couldn't connect with you emotionally. You'll discover why you might feel crushingly lonely, even when surrounded by people who claim to love you, why your relationships feel frustratingly familiar, and most importantly, how to finally break free from these exhausting patterns. This journey isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame. It's about understanding. It's about healing. And it's about finally giving yourself the emotional connection you've always deserved. Let's start with a feeling. A feeling that's incredibly common yet maddeningly hard to put into words. It's the ache of emotional loneliness. This isn't the loneliness of being physically alone. You can feel it in a crowded room, even while being held by someone who loves you. It's a deep, persistent sense of being emotionally invisible. If this feeling has been a quiet companion throughout your life, Dr. Gibson suggests its roots probably trace back to your childhood, to the very first relationships you ever experienced. Growing up with an emotionally immature parent is profoundly lonely. From the outside, everything might have looked completely normal. These parents often provide food, shelter, and safety. They handle your physical needs just fine. But when they can't forge a real emotional connection, a child is left with a gaping hole where a foundation of security should exist. Children don't have words for this experience. They can't articulate, I'm experiencing a lack of emotional intimacy. They just feel this emptiness, this gut-level sense of being alone in the world. When a child feels this loneliness, their instinct is to turn to a parent for comfort. But if that parent is uncomfortable with deep feelings, the child doesn't get comfort. Instead, they might face irritation, dismissal, or even anger. They learn that needing comfort is somehow shameful and inconvenience, so they stop reaching out. The door to emotional connection slams shut, and that core emptiness remains, quietly carried into adulthood, often leading to relationships that unknowingly replay the exact same pattern. So what exactly is this emotional intimacy that was missing? Think of it as having someone you can tell absolutely anything to. Someone you can approach with all your feelings, good or bad, without fear of judgment. It's that profound sense of safety that comes from being truly seen for who you are. Emotionally mature parents create this security naturally. They're comfortable with their own feelings, so they're not threatened by their child's emotions. They're attuned. They notice their child's moods and welcome their emotions with genuine interest and empathy. A child with this kind of parent feels safe, seen, and deeply connected. Emotionally immature parents exist in a completely different universe. They're often so wrapped up in themselves that they simply don't notice their child's inner world. They dismiss feelings because feelings make them uncomfortable. They actually fear emotional intimacy. When their child gets upset, they might get nervous or angry, punishing the child instead of offering comfort. This creates a painful dilemma for the child. The need for connection is so fundamental that children will do whatever it takes to get even a taste of it. They might learn that the price of admission is putting everyone else's needs first. They become helpers, fixers, people who seem to have no needs of their own. They learn to bury their deepest desires, which only creates more loneliness. They can't wait to grow up, convinced that adulthood will bring the freedom and belonging they crave. But in their rush to escape, they often leap into relationships or jobs that exploit them, settling for the familiar feeling of emotional loneliness because, to them, it feels normal. It feels like home. This raises a crucial question: why do we repeat the past? If the lack of connection was so painful, why do so many people find themselves in eerily similar relationships as adults? The answer lies in the most primitive part of our brain, which tells us that what's familiar is safe. We gravitate toward what we know because we've already developed strategies to deal with it. Consider Sophie's story. For 5 years, she dated Jerry, a fun-loving guy who seemed perfect on the surface. But whenever Sophie tried to discuss her feelings or their relationship's future, he'd shut down completely. One evening, he took her to the restaurant where they'd had their first date. Sophie's heart pounded with excitement. She was certain he was going to propose. After dinner, Jerry slid a small jewelry box across the table. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was no ring, just a small piece of paper with a question mark drawn on it. Jerry grinned. "Now you can tell your friends I finally popped the question?" Sophie was devastated. It was cruel and demeaning. But when she called her mother hoping for sympathy, her mother sided with Jerry, telling Sophie it was funny and she was being too sensitive. In that moment, Sophie saw it clearly. Her mother and her boyfriend shared the same emotional insensitivity. With Jerry, she had perfectly recreated the emotional loneliness of her childhood. Every time she tried to express how she felt with either of them, she was left feeling invalidated and alone. Many people like Sophie function so well in the world that no one would guess their inner pain. They often feel guilty for being unhappy. They tell themselves, "I have so much to be thankful for. I should be happy." This is the classic confusion of someone whose physical needs were met, while their emotional needs starved. They don't realize that making an emotional connection shouldn't require Herculean effort. It should be the easy part. And this isn't just a female experience. Our culture often tells men they have fewer emotional needs, but that's a dangerous myth. Men lacking emotional intimacy can feel just as empty, though they may hide it behind a mask of self-reliance. Jake was like this. He'd just married Kayla, a wonderful woman who made him feel loved, yet he found himself feeling depressed. "I should be happy," he said, "but I feel like I'm acting, forcing myself to be more upbeat than I really am." He believed he had to perform happiness for her, to be the person she wanted him to be. When asked what would happen if he were honest with her, he was certain she would be devastated and furious. But this fear didn't sound like Kayla at all. It sounded exactly like the angry, demanding mother he'd grown up with, who taught him that having emotional needs meant he was weak and unlovable. His new, safe relationship with Kayla was giving him the chance to finally be himself, but the old programming from childhood was still running the show, telling him it wasn't safe. For some, this dynamic doesn't play out in romantic relationships but with the parents themselves. People can become so drained from taking care of a demanding, emotionally immature parent that they have no energy left for their own lives. They feel trapped, burdened by a parent who acts as if they own them. Louise was a young teacher who felt completely dominated by her controlling mother. The demands became so overwhelming that Louise started having suicidal thoughts. Her therapist told her in no uncertain terms that her life depended on getting away. When Louise finally told her mother she was moving out, her mother replied, "That's not going to happen. You'd feel awful about yourself." Fortunately, Louise found the strength to leave, discovering that the guilt she felt was a small price to pay for her freedom. One of the most insidious effects of this upbringing is that it teaches you not to trust your own instincts. Without a parent to validate your feelings, you learn to doubt them. You might end up in relationships that your gut tells you are wrong, but you convince yourself it's your job to make them work. You might hear people say, "You can't have everything," but Dr. Gibson points out that this is often what people say when they don't have what they truly need. You can trust yourself. You know when you're emotionally satisfied. That feeling inside telling you something's missing? It's not you being too demanding. It's a signal, a message from your true self, and it's trustworthy. So how do we begin to see our parents clearly, without the fog of childhood idealization or cultural expectations? This isn't about blame or betrayal. It's about objective understanding. Dr. Gibson's mission is helping us see them for who they are, so we can finally understand ourselves. Let's paint a portrait of the emotionally immature personality. First, they're often rigid and single-minded. Once they form an opinion, their mind is closed. There's one right way, their way, and they become very defensive if challenged. They also have remarkably low stress tolerance. Instead of assessing situations calmly, they react. They deny reality, distort it, or blame others. They struggle to admit mistakes. When they get upset, it's hard for them to calm down, and they expect others to soothe them by giving them what they want. A core trait is that they do what feels best in the moment. As we mature, we learn that what feels good isn't always what's right, but for emotionally immature people, that instinct never really changes. They follow the path of least resistance, often making decisions that are shocking in their short-sightedness. Dr. Gibson tells the story of Anna, who convinced her brother Tom to help talk to their elderly father about moving into assisted living. When the moment came for the difficult conversation, Anna looked around and Tom was gone. She saw him out the window, getting in his car and driving away. It seemed unbelievable, but from Tom's perspective, walking out felt a lot better than staying for a confrontation. This leads to another key trait. They're subjective, not objective. How they feel about a situation matters more than what's actually happening. Facts, logic, and history mean very little when stacked against their emotional truth of the moment. They also have little respect for differences. They're annoyed by other people's thoughts and opinions, believing everyone should see things their way. At the very center of their personality is egocentrism. They're self-preoccupied, but not in a joyful, childlike way. It's an anxious self-involvement born from deep insecurity. They're constantly monitoring whether their needs are being met, whether they've been offended. Their self-esteem is fragile, rising and falling based on how others react to them. They can't stand criticism. Because this self-involvement is all-consuming, other people's feelings are simply eclipsed. One woman told her mother how much it hurt to hear constant criticisms of her father. Her mother's reply, "Well, if I couldn't tell you, I wouldn't have anybody to talk to." The daughter's pain didn't even register. This makes them self-referential, but not self-reflective. In any conversation, all roads lead back to them. But this focus isn't about gaining insight. It's about being the center of attention. You might tell them about a crisis you're having, and they'll use it as a springboard to talk about their own divorce. Because they lack self-reflection, they rarely consider their role in problems. If they hurt you, they'll often say, "I didn't mean to," as if their intention absolves them of the impact. One of the most defining characteristics of emotionally immature parenting is role reversal. The parent expects the child to act like the parent, providing comfort, attention, and even confidence. A father might take his 8-year-old daughter out in his new convertible, giddy with excitement, expecting her to be thrilled for him, completely oblivious to the fact that he just abandoned her and her mother, leaving them in a house full of gloom. He needs her to mirror his joy, to function as an admiring parental figure for him. This is all tied to a profound lack of empathy. They're often out of touch with their own deeper feelings, which makes them strikingly blind to how they make others feel. Empathy is the bedrock of emotional intimacy. It's the ability to imagine that other people have their own unique minds and inner worlds. Emotionally immature people lack this. They may be able to read people's intentions, but they don't resonate with their feelings. You might feel sized up by them, but you won't feel felt. Dr. Gibson identifies 4 main types of emotionally immature parents. While they all share these core traits, they express them in different ways. And it's important to remember that a parent can be a blend of these types. First is the emotional parent. These are the most infantile. Their feelings run the show, and they swing dramatically between being overly involved and suddenly withdrawn. They're unstable and unpredictable. When they get upset, the whole family scrambles to soothe them. They treat small problems like catastrophes and see others as either rescuers or abandoners. At the severe end, they can be mentally ill, but even at the milder end, their emotional instability is the most predictable thing about them. Children of these parents often feel like they're walking on eggshells. Second is the driven parent. This type often looks the most normal, even seeming exceptionally dedicated. They're compulsively busy, always trying to perfect everything and everyone, including their children. Their egocentrism is harder to spot because it's masked as deep investment in their child's success. But their goals always take precedence over feelings. They interfere constantly, assuming they know what's best, making their children feel like they're being evaluated at all times. They can't offer the unconditional acceptance that builds true security. Paradoxically, these very driven parents often raise children who are unmotivated and struggle with their own initiative. Third, we have the passive parent. These parents avoid dealing with anything upsetting. They seem more emotionally available than the other types, but only up to a point. When things get too intense, they withdraw. They might be fun and lovable, the favorite parent, but they cannot be counted on for protection or guidance. They often take a back seat to a more dominant and sometimes abusive partner. They turn a blind eye to harmful situations, leaving their children to fend for themselves. A child might adore this parent, but deep down they know they can't truly rely on them. Finally, there's the rejecting parent. These parents seem to have a wall around them. Their interactions consist of issuing commands, blowing up, or isolating themselves from the family. They don't want to be bothered by their children's needs. Their children learn very quickly not to approach them, not to ask for anything. A child of a rejecting parent often grows up feeling like an irritant, a bother, and may even feel apologetic just for existing. They give up asking for what they need, a habit that can have serious consequences in their adult lives. Faced with one or more of these parenting styles, a child has to find a way to cope. Dr. Gibson explains that children develop two powerful, unconscious tools to survive emotional neglect: a healing fantasy and a role self. The healing fantasy is a hopeful story a child creates about how they'll eventually get the love and attention they need. It's a child's solution to a grown-up problem. The fantasy always starts with, if only, for example, if only I'm perfect enough, they'll finally love me. Or, if only I can find a partner who's completely selfless, my loneliness will be cured. This fantasy gives a child the hope to endure a painful childhood. But as adults, we subconsciously try to make this fantasy come true in our relationships, often with disastrous results. We try to force our partners to play a role in our childhood story, a role they were never meant to play. To make the healing fantasy work, the child develops a role self. Instead of just being who they are, they create a persona designed to get some kind of connection from their parents. This process is unconscious. The role self might be the helper, the high achiever, the problem child, or the quiet one. Whatever the role, it's seen as the best way to secure a place in the family. The child's true self, their genuine feelings, interests, and aptitudes, gets pushed aside. Playing a role is exhausting. It has no energy of its own. It steals vitality from the true self, and it can never create a truly deep and satisfying relationship because it isn't real. From these coping mechanisms, two main types of children emerge: internalizers and externalizers. Internalizers believe it's up to them to fix things. They're sensitive, self-reflective, and they try to learn from their mistakes. They believe that if they just try harder, they can make things better. Their healing fantasy is usually about changing themselves to finally earn love. Their anxiety comes from feeling guilty when they displease others and fearing they'll be exposed as an imposter. Their biggest downfall in relationships is being overly self-sacrificing, doing too much for others, and then becoming resentful. Externalizers, on the other hand, believe it's up to others to fix things. They're impulsive and reactive. They blame other people and circumstances instead of looking at their own role in problems. Their healing fantasy is about the outside world changing to meet their needs. If only others would give them what they want, their problems would be solved. They depend on external sources for soothing, which can make them susceptible to addictions and other forms of immediate gratification. Most emotionally immature parents are externalizers. This book is most likely to resonate with internalizers. If you're an internalizer, you were born highly sensitive and perceptive. You react to life like an emotional tuning fork, picking up on the subtle vibrations from everyone around you. You feel things deeply. This is why growing up with an emotionally unengaged parent is so painful for you. Your entire being longs for genuine connection. A blank, unresponsive face feels like a kind of death. To survive, you learned to be helpful, to hide your own needs, to be the good one. You came to believe that the price of connection is putting others first. But being counted on is not the same as being loved, and no child can be good enough to earn love from a deeply self-involved parent. Your strong instinct for connection isn't a weakness. It's not neediness. It's a healthy, powerful mammalian instinct. Neuroscientist Stephen Porges explains that mammals have evolved to be calmed by engagement with others. Seeking comfort is an adaptive, energy-efficient way to deal with stress. It makes us stronger. Only an emotionally phobic person would see the desire for empathy as a sign of weakness. Because of your self-reliance, you became easy to neglect. You learned to get by on emotional vapors, storing up the few moments of affection you received and replaying them in your mind. You may be deeply grateful for the smallest bit of recognition because you're so used to getting by on so little. You likely learned to do most of the emotional work in your relationships. You became an expert at sensing what others needed, at soothing their anxieties, at keeping the peace. You might have even parented your own parent, listening to their problems and offering support long before you were old enough to do so. This pattern continues into adulthood, where you attract needy people and find yourself in lopsided relationships, giving far more than you receive. So how does this cycle break? It often starts with a breakdown. The pain of living through a role self and a failing healing fantasy eventually becomes unbearable. Symptoms like anxiety, depression, or panic attacks begin to surface. But these symptoms aren't signs that you're broken. They're a wake-up call from your true self. The true self is that genuine core part of you that's been there all along. It has no interest in your childhood fantasies or roles. It simply wants to be real. It's trying to tell you that the struggle to deny your emotional truth can't be sustained any longer. A Polish psychiatrist named Kazimierz Dabrowski called this positive disintegration. He saw that emotional distress isn't always an illness. It's often a sign of growth. It's the process of breaking down an old, limited way of being in order to reorganize into a more complex, authentic person. This is the moment when you begin to wake up. You wake up to what you really feel. For so long you may have repressed feelings like anger or dislike, believing they made you a bad person. Tilda was a young woman who felt deeply guilty because she couldn't make her bitter, complaining mother happy. Her depression only lifted when she finally allowed herself to admit a simple, terrifying truth. I don't like her. She could still be grateful for what her mother had done for her, but she no longer had to pretend to feel a way she didn't. Admitting your true feelings just to yourself can be profoundly freeing. You wake up to your anger. Anger is often the emotion that emotionally immature parents punish the most because it's a raw expression of individuality. But anger can be a powerful, healthy signal. It gives you the energy to change things and tells you that you're worthy of being defended. You wake up to the need for better self-care. Internalizers are notorious for pushing themselves to the point of exhaustion, ignoring their body's cues for rest. They believe their worth comes from how hard they're trying. You begin to realize that it's not selfish to rest, to have needs, to set limits. This awakening brings you to a new way of relating to your parent and to everyone. Dr. Gibson calls it the maturity awareness approach. This isn't about confronting your parents or trying to change them. The fantasy that they'll change is the very thing that keeps you hooked. Instead, this is about changing your approach. It begins with detached observation. Instead of reacting emotionally, you become a neutral observer, like a scientist studying a phenomenon. You notice their behavior, their tone, their body language. You notice how you feel. When you feel yourself getting pulled into the old emotional whirlpool, you silently repeat to yourself, detach, detach, detach. This isn't about being cold, it's about staying centered in your own mind. You shift from seeking a relationship to maintaining a state of relatedness. Relatedness means you stay in contact, but you have no goal of a satisfying emotional exchange. You save your aspirations for real relationships with people who can actually give something back. From this place of observation, you can apply 3 strategies. First, express and let go. Say what you feel or want, calmly and clearly. Enjoy the act of self-expression itself, and then release any need for them to hear you or change. The goal isn't to get a certain reaction. The goal is simply to be true to yourself. That part is within your control. Second, focus on the outcome, not the relationship. Before you interact with them, ask yourself, what's my specific, achievable goal for this one interaction? Maybe it's just to ask for information, or to state a boundary, or to arrange a holiday dinner. As soon as you make the goal about improving the emotional relationship, you'll lose. If you keep the focus on a tangible outcome, you're more likely to engage their adult side. Third, manage, not engage. Your goal is to manage the interaction. This might mean gently redirecting the conversation when it goes off track, or setting a time limit on a phone call. You're managing the situation to protect your own emotional well-being, not trying to engage in a deep, intimate connection that they're incapable of. When you start to operate this way, something remarkable can happen. As you become less emotionally needy, as you stop trying to pull them into intimacy, they may feel less threatened. They may actually relax and begin to relate to you in a more respectful, adult-to-adult way. The paradox is that they can only get closer when you've truly relinquished the need for them to be different. This journey frees you to find and build relationships with emotionally mature people. And now you know what to look for. Emotionally mature people are realistic and reliable. They work with reality. They don't fight it. They can think and feel at the same time, so you can reason with them even when they're upset. Their inner consistency makes them trustworthy. They don't take everything personally. They can laugh at themselves. They're respectful and reciprocal. They honor your boundaries. They give back. They don't just take. They're flexible and compromise well, seeking solutions where both people feel satisfied. They're even-tempered. They're willing to be influenced by your perspective. They're truthful, and when they're wrong, they apologize and make amends. Most importantly, they're responsive. Their empathy makes you feel safe. They make you feel seen and understood. They're curious about your inner world. They like to give and receive comfort. They reflect on their actions and are willing to change. They can be playful and laugh. Simply put, they're enjoyable to be around. As you learn to identify these qualities in others, you also learn to cultivate them in yourself. You learn to ask for help. You learn to be yourself, whether people accept you or not. You learn to set limits and to have compassion for yourself. You learn that your goodness as a person isn't based on how much you give away. Ultimately, you find freedom, the freedom to have your own thoughts and feelings, the freedom to set boundaries, the freedom from the crushing weight of a healing fantasy that was never going to come true. And in that freedom, the emotional loneliness that started so long ago finally begins to fade. As we reach the end of our journey through this remarkable book, it's worth pausing to reflect on its most powerful lesson. At its heart, this isn't a book about pointing fingers. It's a book about seeing clearly. The great relief that comes from reading Lindsay Gibson's work is the realization that the confusion, the frustration, and the deep emotional loneliness you may have felt weren't reflections of your worth. They were reflections of your parents' limitations. This distinction is life-changing. For years, you might have been operating under the assumption that if you just found the right words, or were a better son or daughter, or tried a little harder, you could finally unlock the love and connection you craved. This book gently but firmly dismantles that fantasy. It tells you that you can't force someone to have a capacity for emotional intimacy that they simply don't possess. And that's not your failure. The true gift here is a roadmap to emotional freedom. It's the permission to stop trying to get water from a dry well. The energy you've spent trying to change, please, or understand an emotionally immature parent is energy that can now be redirected toward your own life, your own healing, and your own happiness. The concept of positive disintegration is particularly profound. It reframes our moments of crisis, our anxiety, our depression, our breakdowns, not as signs of weakness, but as the painful, necessary crumbling of an old self that no longer serves us. It's the true self demanding to be heard. It's an invitation to grow. So how can you begin to apply this wisdom in your own life, starting today? Here are a few simple, practical steps. First, practice detached observation in just one interaction. The next time you're on the phone with a difficult family member or friend, instead of getting emotionally hooked, try to become a neutral observer. Notice their tone of voice. Notice the topics they gravitate toward. Notice how you feel in your body. Don't try to change anything. Just observe. This simple shift from reacting to observing is the first step toward reclaiming your emotional balance. Second, get curious about your healing fantasy. Ask yourself, what's the secret, hopeful story I've been telling myself about how I'll finally feel loved and whole? Maybe it's a story about finding the perfect partner, or achieving a certain level of success, or getting an apology you'll never receive. You don't need to do anything about it. Just acknowledging the fantasy begins to reduce its power over your subconscious choices. Finally, practice one small act of self-compassion. The next time you make a mistake or feel overwhelmed, instead of listening to that critical inner voice, pause and speak to yourself as you would a dear friend. You might simply say, "This is really hard right now, and it's okay to feel this way." Self-compassion is the antidote to the shame that emotionally immature parents so often instill in their children. It's the beginning of reparenting yourself with the kindness and understanding you always deserved. That was a summary of Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay C. Gibson. We've covered the core ideas today, but a summary is like looking at a map of a beautiful country. It can show you the layout, the major cities, and the rivers, but it can never replace the experience of actually walking the trails, breathing the air, and meeting the people. The real magic of this book is in the quiet moments of reading, when a particular story or a simple phrase connects with a part of you that's been waiting to be understood. This summary is a doorway. If anything we've talked about has resonated with that quiet, knowing part of you, I encourage you to walk through it. Grab a copy of the book, because the journey of reading it isn't just about learning new information. It's an experience that can genuinely change the way you see yourself, your past, and the bright, open future that awaits you. The link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable, and if it offered you a moment of clarity or hope, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe. We journey through another life-changing book from the Billionaire's Bookshelf every week, and I'd be honored to have you with us as we continue to learn and grow together.